You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, presented by Maria Menounos and streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Justice is Served here on Black Hollywood Live, where we bring you the latest in trending legal news on a weekly basis. My name is Sara Azari. I'm a criminal defense attorney and one of the three hosts of this show, and I'm joined today by my co-host, attorney Chelsea Galicia. Hey, Chelsea.
Hi there.
All right, so before we kick off the show, I just want to remind our viewers to stay with us throughout the show as we're going to cover the FIFA soccer corruption scandal that broke out last week with the arrest of the executives, the trial of the Colorado theater shooter, the latest Supreme Court ruling regarding threats on social media, as well as a discussion on whether meditation can help with racial bias. So let's get started, Chelsea, with our case of the week, which is about the largest international white-collar case involving corruption and bribery underway as 14 top executives in the soccer world have been arrested on a 47-count indictment pending in the U.S. District Court for the District of Brooklyn. The facts are rather lengthy in that this has been going on for so long in the soccer world, apparently as far back as like the early 90s. What's interesting about this case is the case started out with a tax evasion investigation of Charles Blazer, who is one of these top executives. He was I believe the president of FIFA at some point. No, I'm sorry, he wasn't the president of FIFA. He was
another organization that's under
another soccer organization, and he's the largest American name in the soccer world. And this is a guy who, was spending $6,600 a month on rent for an apartment in the Trump Towers for his cats. He drove extremely nice cars, luxury cars, ate at the best restaurants, owned a lot of different homes and properties all over the world, and essentially never filed taxes and forget about paying his taxes. He never actually filed his returns. So one of the IRS agents here in Los Angeles started investigating him back in, I think, 2011, and this led into finding out about this tremendous corruption with briberies that was going on in FIFA, which is the International Federation of the Football Association, which is soccer, not American football. And so, Chelsea, what happens is an FBI agent and an IRS agent followed Charles Blazer in New York in 2011, and they basically pull him over and they say, look, you either cooperate with the government in this investigation of corruption, or you're going to go to jail.
Right this minute,
yeah. And so what happened was there was already an indictment against him. And actually in 2013, he pled guilty on that indictment, and he turned into a wire-wearing informant who worked for these agents and essentially recorded a lot of private meetings between these executives where some very shady deals were made. And as a result, the U.S. government has now been able to indict several more individuals, and I think there's more coming. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, Chelsea, for us to discuss is, what do you think about the $10 million bribery scheme? This is that the crux of this corruption case is that there was a $10 million wire that South Africa sent to FIFA, and that this was essentially to buy the bid for the 2010 World Cup to take place in South Africa. What do you think about this?
I don't think it was surprising to me. I think that even though this may have started as an IRS investigation, it is a little interesting that the two biggest consequences for the soccer world at large, not just these individuals, is that the World Cup isn't going to be held in Qatar in 2022, and they're thinking maybe they're trying to pull it from Russia. They're supposed to be the next hosts, and that it might be politically motivated because in reality, a $10 million bribery scheme isn't that much when we look at some of the, well, if you know about some of the cases that are going on in this country, it doesn't seem that outlandish. I kind of would be surprised if they didn't find something like this going on.
Are you saying that the bribe itself is not a lot of money, or you're saying that that you're not surprised that there was a bribery?
Both.
Okay. I think the bribe is a lot of money.
I mean, when you, for you and I, $10 million, sure. But it's like the size of the entity. Like when we talked about the NFL and the settlement that they have to pay out for these concussions, nearly $1 billion in settlement sounds like a lot of money, except when you look at the revenue of the NFL and they're at $10 billion a year.
And you're talking about the revenue of FIFA?
Right, and what they make, the sponsorships, the partnerships.
Here's the problem. But here's where I take issue, or I take the other side of that, which is, there was 3 wire transfers made between January and March of 2008 that amounted to this $10 million. The allegations of the prosecution in this case, and this is what their investigation shows, is that there was a meeting in 2000 and I believe 7 or 8 where they discussed, South Africa getting their votes to be the host of the 2010 World Cup, and in exchange for this $10 million. But South Africa then couldn't come up with the money. So instead, what they did was they told FIFA, the South African executives of their soccer federation, told FIFA, hey, listen, instead of sending us money for the 2010 World Cup, which they had already won the bid, right? They'd already been declared the host. Why don't you just give it over to Mr. Jack Warner, who was another executive, Chuck Blazer, and the executives who were involved in this bribery scheme. So yeah, if the money actually went to FIFA, I would agree with you, but the money ended up in the pockets of these executives. And so essentially the prosecution is saying the bribe was paid on the back end of the deal. So it was paid by FIFA to these executives instead of paying South Africa for what they owed them for the fund, for the soccer fund. Yeah. So I think it is a lot of money, and I think these people have been doing this. Chuck Blazer, actually today it came out that in 2013 when he pled guilty to bribery, tax evasion, money laundering, etc., he, as part of his factual basis in his plea agreement, actually confessed to additional instances of bribery, sometime in like 1992. So this is I believe it's $150 million case of bribes.
When you look at it all together, it looks pretty massive.
And so it's not just the 10 million, although 10 million was a big deal. And so one of the things that Sepp Blatter, who's the
now former
president who just resigned yesterday,
I don't know if we can call it a full resignation because he hasn't stepped down yet, just said that he will as soon as a replacement is found.
Because the law enforcement officials finally made it clear that he is a target. They are looking at him. They hadn't made it clear before, which I'm like, how could he not be? He's so close to this. And also the indictment names an unidentified, executive, a high echelon executive, but not by name. And there's been questions whether that's Blatter, and Blatter says, of course it's not me. This is all based on a motive by the U.S. because they're pissed off that they didn't get the bid. And it's not. It's not about soccer. It's not about the bid. It's about corruption. And this is a huge, and agents, IRS agents who routinely work on tax evasion cases suddenly stumble upon this huge international case.
Yeah, it's
exciting.
When I first heard about it, I didn't know if it was such the IRS just stumbled on it. I wondered if it was politically motivated. At first, I wondered, why the heck is the FBI so involved in this? FIFA is headquartered in Switzerland. What laws have they signed themselves up for? Do they have an internal sort of police force. Before this, I did not look much into FIFA, so I didn't know how the operation was run. So I was like, why is the FBI spending so much time and our tax dollars on some soccer thing? And now, I mean, I get it. There's a lot that has to do with U.S. sponsors, companies,
Sure.
the banking system.
The U.S. banks were used for some of these shady transactions, so that gives it the U.S. jurisdiction to go after these people
So
abroad.
it's good reason for them to go after them, but I don't know if that's what motivated this in the first place. It just seems a little interesting, I guess is the word, that Russia is up next and the U.S. is experiencing very strained relations with Russia. So I don't know if it's so much about
Could
that
be.
we didn't get it, but that we
Could
don't
be,
like
but
who's
you know
getting
what?
it.
There's been allegations about the soccer world being corrupt and these bids being given to countries. Basically, these are bought out bids for a long, long time. And so finally, I think it's like kudos to the United States for doing something about this.
Although I hope that people think that, but then I can imagine a lot of people are like, the U.S. is the corruption police of the world. Come on, give me a break. I'm sure a lot of people are saying that we need to clean up our own home before we start going to clean up the world.
Right.
So I can see both perspectives.
But you know what? The government makes a lot of money because a lot of these corruption cases are settled by like FIFA is not an individual, so FIFA is not going to do time in jail, but FIFA is going to enter into a plea agreement with the government where they pay a pretty penny.
I hope so, but in a lot of white-collar cases that I see, I always feel like the companies never pay close to what the damages are that they caused.
Well, in corruption cases, though, you're talking about a whole other. I mean, there's a whole area of the law under the Foreign Corruptions Practice Act, where there's so much going on in Brazil with Petrobras and the oil industry, and the any small contact with the U.S. gives the U.S. jurisdiction. And in fact, I wish I could practice that kind of law more than what I'm doing running around to courts, because it's such a lucrative area of white collar defense. You're basically doing investigations of where these bribes and gifts were handed out, and essentially it's a straight plea. It's not at all, these cases don't go to trial. And so, but Blatter interestingly was saying that or that the issue around that unnamed executive is that did he actually know that the transaction he caused to be made, the bribe, so to speak, was a bribe, that money was a bribe. And again, I think he was just too close to these people and this organization and the money not to have known what's happening.
I think he's been involved in the
40
organization,
years.
right?
He's 79 years old,
right.
Yeah.
So
right.
It would be virtually impossible to believe that he didn't know what was going on in the rules of the
right.
game.
And suddenly, and imagine, last Friday he said, I will be in command of this boat called FIFA, and we will bring it back to shore. And then suddenly, fast forward 4 days to Tuesday, he's like, I'm going to be leaving.
Yeah.
And so the last issue I think that's interesting in this case is whether these people are actually going to make it to court in Brooklyn. And they will, I think, in a few months, because extradition actually, I think they're going to fight extradition. But in these cases, when there is a law in the foreign country that also makes that conduct illegal, which clearly they have money laundering and tax evasion and bribery laws there, then the officials will cooperate and ship the people over to the U.S. So it'll be interesting to see the outcome of this. I think people that are really involved in sports and soccer are happy to see that something's being done in this, because it was something that was smelling fishy for a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, turning it over to Chelsea for On the Docket, and actually a special message we have for our viewers today before we proceed with the rest of the show.
Yes, we got a little favor to ask you. I don't actually know if it's a favor that we're asking you. Maybe we're asking you to help us make this more informative and educational and entertaining. So we would like you to take a survey. To take that survey, please go to podcast1.com. That's podcast1.com. It'll take all of like 3 minutes for you to tell us how we're doing, how we can make things better around here, for us to get to know you. So we would really like to hear from you. We already love your tweets and comments, but this is one other way for you to interact with us and to give us your feedback.
And is that podcast, like, can we spell it so that they don't think it's a number?
Oh, yeah, good point. Podcast, one as in spelled out ONE gmail.com. Cool? All right. Hopefully we get lots and lots of your feedback. We're looking forward to it. And in the meantime, we will turn our attention to the case of the Aurora theater shooter. So you'll remember back in 2012 in Aurora, Colorado, a mass shooter just broke out during the screening of Black Knight Rising.
It's a Batman movie.
Batman, yes, and killed 12 people. And so we are now in about the 25th day of trial, where the shooter, James Holmes, has pled guilty by reason, or pled not guilty by reason of insanity. So no one disputes that he was the gunman, but he is making a case that he was insane at the time that he pulled the trigger, and that is why he should spend the rest of his life in a hospital mental institution rather than face the death penalty as the prosecutors are seeking.
And aren't there like 166 charges against him or something crazy like that?
A lot,
Yeah.
yes. Of course, the most serious are for the deaths of the 12 people. What's been really fascinating about this case, because the issue is just so narrow, whether he's insane, it has been, looking at how he appears, how he presents himself in court, about the interviews that he's had over 22 hours with a court-appointed psychiatrist, where he makes it sound like he thought that by killing these people, he would somehow be absorbing or inheriting their self-worth. Apparently,
It's a unit per person killed or something like that, he says.
Yeah, I don't know. He said that he was trying to get himself out of a funk, probably more than a funk, a depression, that he either needed to kill somebody else or kill himself. He was telling the psychiatrist, well, he did not tell the psychiatrist of any explicit plans, but did say that the medication, this is really fascinating to me. He was prescribed a medication by a psychiatrist that he was seeing at the time, and he said that made him suicidal and homicidal. So it's a little bit of trying to blame something else, but I'm wondering, well, maybe there's something to it, because this isn't the first time that I've heard someone say, or we've seen somebody kill themselves or other people while being on psychotropic medications.
It takes the wrong medication or the wrong dosage, and that's it.
I don't know if this is I don't know if you can really call it a side effect or an effect of some of this medication. Anyway, there is so much to talk about in this this case. The first thing I wanted to ask you about was his presentation, because we've seen different pictures of him come out of court over the time that he has been there, looking quite differently in different pictures. And I wanted to ask you if you thought that there was any rhyme or reason to the different look that he's been presenting in court.
I think so. I think what the defense case here is that he has severe schizophrenia, and most importantly that he has a distorted sense of wrong from right. And of course the prosecution is saying he might have some kind of mental illness, but he absolutely knows what is wrong and what is right, and what are the consequences of his wrong behavior. And so what the defense attorneys have done, I mean, I think what the viewers can see now is he's in court with this fiery red hair with crazy eyes, and this was much earlier on in his case. And suddenly now, during his trial, he looks a lot better. He's got
still
facial,
with the crazy eyes.
Well, yeah, but I think he looks more sedated. He looks, he's
subdued.
Got,
for
more
sure.
subdued. And I think that is exactly what I would do with a client in a situation, because at trial you're trying to show the jury that this person was mentally ill to the point of not knowing right from wrong, and insane, legally insane at the time of the incident. And now, as a result of treatment and addressing the problem, he has been able to be the person he is before the jury, remorseful, and obviously they're looking at him the whole time, and it has to match up with whatever the defense attorneys are trying to.
So you think it's in his interest for his attorneys to make him look
absolutely,
more
because
normal
what
now.
you want to do is, as attorney, you want to you want to separate the normal him from the mentally ill him. You want to say he was this person with the red hair and the crazy eyes, but look at who he is now. And that's a sign that he has a mental illness. That was the mentally ill James Holmes. He's not that way. He needs treatment. Therefore, he needs to be sentenced to a treatment facility so he can continue to get treatment. You know, one of the things, Chelsea, about mental illness, I think we, all of us, I think, have a very difficult time empathizing and understanding mental illness. I think we expect the mentally ill people to take their medication, go to their counseling sessions, get well, get better, get a job, get with it. And we don't understand that there's this deep-rooted struggle that these individuals have between breaking free from the disease and then them getting pulled into and seduced by that evil of the disease, which may very well include going to a theater and committing this heinous massacre. And so, what the defense attorneys are doing, they're saying that is who he was because he was insane.
Well, I think more people have actually experienced some form of mental illness or know somebody who has and would say, but that person is not going to show up in a movie theater and try and kill everybody in sight. There was some planning here. Mm-hmm. So this wasn't just some momentary loss of touch with reality. I mean, he thought about this. He planned it. And it's not some disconnect with reality where he would be not liable or not responsible, or we can't hold him responsible for it. Mental illness doesn't mean that you're a completely deranged person. Right. Mental illness shows up in many different ways. But there's still
mental illness also doesn't mean legal insanity. Mental illness has to be such that you can't appreciate right from wrong,
and that's
for it
exactly
to be legal
where
insanity.
I was about to get to, is that even if you're mentally ill, you can still know right from wrong.
And that's the prosecution saying.
And so I think that the defense, it feels like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. They actually haven't spoken at all. We're still on the prosecution's case right now. But if it's true that they're trying to present a normal, non-mentally ill person now, well, that doesn't make sense. It was just momentary, and then he just happened to shoot back then, and all of a sudden he's cured now.
No, it's not momentary, because you actually, if you look at evidence number P-TR-341, which is a brown spiral notebook that was essentially Holmes's notebook. It is a compilation of musings of a killer, and it's the prosecutors using it to their advantage. I think it's a very good piece of evidence for the prosecution, but the jurors have a copy of this entire notebook. So while the prosecutor has had elicited testimony from one of the investigating officers about very specific parts of the notebook that are really damning to Holmes and show that he premeditated, show that he was, he went to the extent of visiting theaters and looking at the proximity between the theater and the parking lot to see which one is better for him. He looked at, the show times to see where he can, hopefully miss some children, maybe go to a later show so the children don't get killed, because he called that a collateral side effect that he was trying to avoid. He looked at, he talked about in this notebook about serial killing, too much contact with victims. No. Bombs are too well regulated. No. Upshot, mass murder spree, check mark. I mean, this is really bad for him, but like you said, the defense hasn't gotten to it. The defense is going to explore all the other parts of this notebook that are actually indicative of the fact that this guy was mentally out there. I can pretty much say maybe not know the difference between right and wrong, because at some point he talks about the other person that he is and then the biological me. He talks about the I can't remember what exactly the quote was, but he talks about, the biological me versus this other me.
I think a lot of us have that. It's called like an ego, or it's called, the voice of angel, devil, your mother, whatever, but we don't kill people from it. It seems to me, based on everything that's been presented in the interviews that he's had with the psychiatrist, he talks about the medication made him do this, or he wishes that the psychiatrist would have sort of locked him up on a 5150, that maybe if the psychiatrist had I don't know if he used these words exactly, but essentially done her job correctly,
Right.
he wouldn't have been able to do this. So it seems a lot of finger pointing outwards to me. And
Well, he had a to-do list, which was kind of interesting to me. He said, buy stun gun and folding knife, research firearm laws and mental illness, buy handgun, remote detonation equipment and body armor, and practice shooting at the range.
Right.
He was
in the same notebook is where he wrote about this medication that he was on, sertraline, that he said it washed away his fears and unleashed his own dislike of others. He said, no more fear, hatred unchecked. And
Right.
that's frightening of him as an individual, and it's also frightening of an effect of a medication. I hope somebody's investigating the effects of these medications, because if these medications have anything to do with helping people feel this way, we should probably look at, I don't know, changing the medication or taking it off the market.
This is, I'm sorry, I just realized where he says, the real me is fighting for the biological me. That's the struggle of someone with mental illness. Again, I think what our viewers should note as this trial unfolds is that nobody's questioning his mental illness. Clearly, he's not at all there. I think the issue boils down to whether the jury's going to be swayed that on July 20th of 2012, he was that mentally ill not to appreciate the consequences of his actions and the fact that what he was doing was against the law and it was wrong.
I haven't heard anything in the interviews with saying anything
No,
about...
actually, in fact, the psychiatrist said that he believes that he's remorseful today, but that he believes that he had full capacity to deliberate between right and wrong and then act on it on July 20th of 2012.
Yeah,
Anyway.
so we'll see if the jury agrees with us. Am I understanding you correctly that you think he was not insane at the time that he pulled the trigger?
It's hard to tell. That the journal is so, at some points I think, wow, he really may not have been able to know right from wrong. He was just so out there. And then there's things I stumble upon in the journal that I read that sway me the other way. So it'll be interesting to see what the defense case proves.
Can I say something to this too?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know I'm not exactly a lawyer. I just think it's interesting though that if you take the simple act of a guy goes in, grabs guns, and goes into a movie theater and shoots the place up. I mean, automatically that is some sort of insanity right there. But at the same time, if any person does that, and especially if it's premeditated like this, you could argue insanity for literally any murderer everywhere. The law still needs to apply.
Right, of course. And that's why there's a definition of legal sanity versus just insanity.
Right. And I
legal
think-
insanity versus just insanity. Because any murderer, I think, is insane to a certain extent.
But even going to the drugs and saying that, for instance, if he was under the influence of drugs, which was pushing to him mentally to a place of legal insanity or whatever the term is,
Right.
how is that any different from somebody getting drunk and killing their wife while they're drunk? They're still arrested for murder.
Right.
Because we hold them responsible for taking the drink.
Exactly.
Yes.
And he's responsible for taking these drugs. This is a man who went into a movie theater and shot up the place and killed multiple people.
It's
Yeah.
one of the worst massacres in American history.
I don't even think this guy deserves a trial. And I know I understand that's the law. And yeah, this is
Right.
the legal show. And he does, let me take that back, he does deserve a trial. But to plead insanity on something that is so premeditated, I find it preposterous.
Yeah, I don't think he was insane, and we'll see if the jury
But
agrees with
everyone
Stephen
deserves
and I.
a defense, a full defense. And
Spoken like a true defense attorney.
when you look at this guy, what else could you possibly say? You can't say it wasn't my client there. You can't say he didn't do it, or you can't say it was an accident. So you got to look at what you have to work with, and it's basically his mental illness.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay, well, would have been interesting if he would have posted something on Facebook before he did this. Takes us right into our next
It's probably
story.
the only thing he didn't do.
Right? So about 6 months ago now, we covered the story that the Supreme Court was hearing a case about a guy who poetically or lyrically
However, it didn't turn out to be like that at all. The Supreme Court did not at all touch upon the First Amendment issue, and they stuck to this intent issue, sending the case back, reversing the conviction. This was a 44-month sentence. The guy only did 3 years. He's now out because of the reversal of his conviction. And they basically told the lower court, you guys cannot apply the reasonable person standard. You can't just look at the words and say whether a reasonable listener would take this to be a threat, and if they did, then you can convict the person. You need to look at the intent. You need some evidence of intent. And so one of the things I wanted to discuss with you is all the possibilities. I mean, here this is an Eminem lyric in quotes on his wall, I guess, the Facebook wall.
Was it actually an Eminem lyric, or he just said he was inspired by?
I think it's part of a song. And then Chief Justice Roberts, this I thought was really cool, he started regurgitating the lyrics, and he said, wait a minute, to the lawyers, he goes, wait a minute, so you're telling me if Eminem is in concert and says this stuff on stage, it's cool, but this guy gets convicted because it's on his Facebook? And I think the Supreme Court ruling was really narrow, broad, because Chief Justice Roberts actually reiterated that, look, if we find any evidence of intent, we're gonna take this to be a threat, which does not deserve First Amendment protection. And I think this is what I was going to ask you, Chelsea. Is these are some of the challenges I think that we face with social media, and now the crime scene being the internet, which is just, it's constantly changing, and we have to sort of figure out all the intricacies of this crime scene, and what happens if this same quote was sent in a Facebook message to the wife? Or what if she was tagged in this post? Or what if her picture accompanied this post? Would that then show intent?
Well, I mean, I wish, because it's meant to instill fear in that person when they're tagged or when it's sent to them. And so...
And public service announcement, block and unfriend your ex-wife and your ex-girlfriend, okay? And then say whatever the hell you want to say about them on Facebook, but don't have them on there looking,
Right, and also, I to the point that you made earlier, this ruling was pretty narrow. It was about the standard that he was convicted on, not the First Amendment. So we can't run around now saying that we have the First Amendment right to say anything we want on Facebook, including threats to people, because that's still not protected, and that's not what the court said.
Also, the court was vague about what intent is. It recklessness? Is it how it's conceived? Whether the intent is actually conceived and imminent? They left everybody kind of in limbo. They really didn't go there.
Well, there were two dissenting opinions, and one of them sort of agreed in part and dissented in part. And the part where he dissented said, no, there was actually evidence presented that he went out of his way to make sure that she saw it.
Right.
And that's what kind of fascinated me, like, oh, really? So then how is that not intent? I don't know if that was missed by the other justices or it wasn't sufficient for the other justices to pick up on, but I hope this is very, very narrow.
And he also made the same threat. It was addressed to her, or implicated her, and a federal, I think federal agents, as well as a kindergarten nearby. And so that's why this ended up in federal court. I think, even though he's using the internet and that makes it a federal case because he's using the wires, but I think it was more so because government agents were also threatened or felt threatened. But you know what? Here's the thing. The domestic violence advocates and victim advocates are saying, this is crazy. This now opens the door to people freely making threats just because, they can't.
When the government gets threatened, we spring into action. Just today or yesterday, somebody in Boston was shot and killed as they were planning to attack the police. So this one day, not so far in the future, we're going to get something more clear where the Supreme Court does rule on the First Amendment part of this.
Yeah, but meanwhile, you can't have teenagers who are just, saying crap or, on their social media. You can't have these parents have their kids subjected to felonies for making threats on Facebook. So there's definitely this counter interest.
I don't actually agree with that. I think kids, we don't hold them to the same standard as adults. You can't, in this country, by the current Constitution, or the Supreme Court hasn't overruled a prior ruling that we can't put to death a person that was under the age of 18 when they committed murder. But if if I threaten somebody on Facebook, I'm going to kill you. It
No,
doesn't
of
matter if I'm
course, but-
13 or 30.
No, I'm not talking about the age. What I'm talking about is that youth being so much more involved with social media and communicating on social media.
They need to get responsible real fast. I don't think that they get a pass just because they're
Chelsea,
young.
you can't just put away people just because of the listener's perception of whether they're threatened or not. What if I don't like you and I just go out and say I felt threatened by what you said? I can't put you away just because I feel that way about you.
But there is some element. I don't think that
No,
the
but that's
reasonable
why the
standard
intent-
interpretation should be done away with altogether. It should be a reasonable person would think that they are threatened. Somebody tried to defend this decision by saying, "Yeah, there's so many misunderstandings on social media."
I think you can arrive at the justified conviction by having the standard of it's not very clear what it is, but it's a subjective standard. It's not reasonable person, because you know what? If there's threats before, if it's in a message on Facebook, all of these pieces of evidence make it intentional. So why not have subjective intent? I mean, I don't think it's that hard to prove. If it's there, then I think the person deserves to get put away. But if it's not there, I think we're risking listeners who are just overly sensitive say that they felt threatened by this, and then someone goes away when
But overly sensitive wouldn't hold up on the reasonable the person. And okay, fine, reasonable person plus some intent, fine. But we're this line of, do you have a right? Do you have a stronger right to express how you feel, even though that might be exhibiting violence towards me? Or do I have a right to feel safe that I'm not under attack emotionally, physically? I think that I want you to express yourself freely, maybe to a psychiatrist.
Get off my Facebook. Don't read it.
But if he was the one that was trying to make her see it,
of course. But obviously, there was no other evidence of intent, or I can guarantee you, Scalia, for one, Justice Scalia, would be right there writing the opinion for the majority, saying that this guy is violent. He's got to,
Yeah.
Anyway,
there should be a limit. I think sometime soon we'll get to that limit, but
we're going to
not today.
tip the scale. And today we want to talk to you about a woman, a Professor McGee up north in San Francisco, who is a very petite African-American woman who lives in a very posh part of San Francisco called Pacific Heights, I believe. And on a Saturday when she's, rolling around in her little Lululemon whatever outfit, a delivery man comes to the door with flowers and says, "This is for Professor McGee." And when she takes the flowers and says, "It's for me," he's kind of in shock that there's this African-American woman living in this neighborhood.
he was like, "Are you sure?
Are you sure you are Professor? What?" And so she then gets inspired to write this article, and it was in Huffington Post, I believe, where she talks about how all of us have some type of bias in our daily lives, whether it's a police officer who goes out and shoots a subject who doesn't deserve to be shot and kills them. That's one extreme. Or even the flower delivery guy who comes in and is in disbelief.
Wasn't the flower delivery guy also black?
Yes. And one of her points
really
is that this sort of inherent, this sort of bias that exists in all of us is even within our own race, that that we're just taught that maybe this black lady cannot be a professor and cannot be living in this neighborhood. Yeah. So what she has explored, and it's still being studied and it's still under research, but she seems to have certain results that make her believe that this might be helpful, is that mindfulness meditation, by raising awareness of racism and then doing meditation practices, creates it's not a cure, it's not the answer to bias and race-based bias, but it definitely helps to stop and think. To me, it sounds like a pause. What she calls it, first of all, she says color blindness versus mindfulness. She says that we're actually not colorblind. We had the guest.
So interesting that this article came out right after that.
A couple weeks ago, who talked about colorblind laws, and this is so true, is that to think that we're colorblind is the worst premise we can start with, because we are not colorblind. I know that Chelsea's white. She knows that I'm kind of white, brown, whatever. We know
I'm not
what we
fully
are.
white, although I look white. See, there's
Yeah, I
another
know.
bias.
That's another bias. Yeah, you're Hispanic. So anyway, so it's like we have these things. So to say we're colorblind is a fallacy. So we have to start with the premise that we're not. Since we're not, we have to raise awareness of race bias and then do these practices. And she calls it color insight practices. So our question to you is, and I have to say, it sounds a little hokey to me.
That's what I thought some people would say. It's some new age, freaky, weird thing that
Right.
we're going to start doing. But I got to speak out in defense of it because there's been a lot of science over a long time, mostly in the last couple of decades, that's finding that these mindfulness practices and meditation help people focus and get greater control over their emotions and increase their capacity to think clearly and act with purpose, especially in the moment.
I think people that meditate generally tend to pause before they act.
So what is the harm? I think
right.
it's a great idea, but we want to hear from you. Do you think it's a hokey idea, waste of time, or should we give it a shot?
Yeah, do you think it might help with race bias? So you can tweet me at Azari Law.
At Chelsea Galicia.
And either way, whether you tweet us on this or not, please keep the dialogue going during the week. We love to hear from you. So please find us on iTunes and YouTube. Click like, post your comments, post your feedback, and we will get right back to you. And we will
And don't forget podcast survey.
Yep.
Podcast one.
We will see you next week
.com.
right here on Justice is Served. Bye-bye.
From producers Maria Menounos, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire BHL crew, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us at info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I'm your BHL announcer, Scipio. Instagram me at Planet Scipio. Thank you for tuning in. The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.